Toxic masculinity, we've sort of heard this phrase popping up. It's a phrase that's gained a lot of attention recently, especially with the Me Too movement. Now the American Psychological Association issued new guidelines on treating toxic masculinity in boys and men.
Of course, shortly after the release of these new guidelines, Gillette, you may have seen this, dropped a commercial addressing the issue. Watch.
We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too long. We can't laugh it off.
Who's the daddy? What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says
And there will be no going back.
All right, so that was the Gillette, as you can imagine. It was very polarizing. So joining us now to break down these new guidelines and talk about that specific ad is psychologist Dr. Lisa Damour. Good to see you, Lisa.
Good morning. Good to see you.
So let's start with the APA report. They issued guidelines on how to treat toxic masculinity. What are some of those guidelines and who are they targeting?
So the guidelines are on how we treat men across the board. And toxic masculinity is an element of that. And this is something that the American Psychological Association has routinely done. We issue guidelines, or that body issues guidelines that help us understand the special challenges that different populations face. So in 2007, they issued guidelines around the treatment of women and girls. And these guidelines are designed to make sure that clinicians are thinking about the broad cultural forces that affect certain segments of the people we care for.
So I thought it was really interesting reading an article on this in the New York Times that up until now, there had been certainly focused on other groups like other minority groups and how, a psychologist and psychiatrist could better attend to their needs. But men, particularly white men, were sort of considered the norm. So if something deviated from white men, then they needed to be addressed in a special way. But now we're saying no, like the male experience also comes with its own challenges. So how is toxic masculinity, and I know I can almost hear people sort of snickering out there when they hear that phrase, how is it hurting men in the long run?
So the idea behind toxic masculinity is that there's rules men are expected to play by in our culture, and that those rules don't actually serve the men well. And the rules are along the lines of you're supposed to be tough, emotion is weak, you're supposed to be a risk taker, you're supposed to be brave all the time. And then as they get more and more troublesome, it's things like, you're cool if you're sexist, things like that. Now, it's important to say, most guys are great, and most men are as uncomfortable with these rules as everyone else is. But we do, in fact, see a lot of men who suffer as a function of these rules for how they're supposed to be. And we see that they also cause suffering in others because of these unhelpful rules that have grown up in the culture of what it means to be male.
It does strike me, what's interesting to me is the very idea of what masculinity is and what it means, and if it's a social construct or based on a social norm, and how it varies among different cultures and different traditions. What is that definition? Because it strikes me that some of the pushback that I saw on this guideline had to do with, they sort of blanket generalize men and boys, and I don't know that masculinity is even gender specific.
I think that's right. So one of the things that we psychologists try to do is to not paint anything with a broad brush. So we can say, at the 30,000-foot level, we need to think about what are the unhelpful rules for men, but then what does it mean to be an African-American man, and what does it mean to be an Asian man, and what does it mean to be a man from Latino culture? And our job then is to make sure that we are not underestimating the complexities that come up for each subgroup of men. In the same way we don't want to paint the whole culture with a broad brush, we don't want to paint the culture of maleness with a broad brush.
So this Gillette ad got a lot of attention. Vlad and I spoke about it yesterday and played about 25 seconds of it. A lot of people loved it, but there was a lot of criticism, thinking that it was, intended to make men feel bad about being men. I want to play a little bit of it, and then I definitely want to get your take on it. So this is a little bit of a reaction to the ad from Good Morning Britain.
Never seen a top female company like Gillette aimed at women for personal hygiene or whatever, starting a commercial with a basic premise that women are bad things.
Oh, I would love to do that. I would.
Many adverts.
I could write the treatment for that advert. You could teach women not to make false rape allegations, not to commit paternity fraud, not to deny fathers their rights to their children after a.
So why are you laughing?
Well, we could also.
Why are you laughing?
That
is the worst. That is the worst.
6% of rape allegations in this country end in conviction. That's appalling.
All right, so yeah, I think you heard sort of amongst the more extreme criticisms of the ad, but people were really heated about it. So first, Doctor, I kind of want to get your take on this ad. Sort of not talking about the study now, but do you think they nailed it, or what's your take?
I think it's a well-meaning ad, and I'm glad they did it. And the whole ad really emphasizes the importance of good guys stepping in when other men are not acting well. So the argument in the ad, one way to slice it, is that most guys are great, and it falls to them often to be mindful of men who are not conducting themselves in ways that are good for everybody else. So I can see how one might watch that ad and feel like, especially if one were a man, feel like, gosh, this ad is suggesting that all men are bad. That's not actually the content of the ad, and that is certainly not the thrust of the American Psychological Association recommendations. The thrust of those is that men are suffering, and that we are clinicians to address that.
Yeah, Doctor, that was actually going to be how I wanted to sort of wrap up this discussion, which is, number one, as we've been saying, these are guidelines. They're not rules. They're not a blanket, this is how you need to treat or behave or act in any sort of society. And number two, according to what I read, this was done to help men because of the fact that men die earlier than women. Before, men are seeing higher suicide rates in this country and in other countries than we've seen before.
The study was done.
Yeah, correct. But because we see men with higher addiction levels to narcotics than we see with with women and in other societies. And so, am I right about that, and how I sort of interpreted why they were putting this out?
That is exactly right. Here is the thing. It is unhealthy to feel like you're not allowed to have the full range of human emotions. If part of what it means to be a man is that you cannot be vulnerable, you cannot be sad, you cannot get close, we will see suffering, and it will come out in other ways. It will come out in anger. It will come out in substance abuse. It will come out in violence and high risk taking. That is what we are seeing, and we want to help men take better care of themselves and have better relationships with the people around them. And at its worst, masculinity can get in the way of that.
Dr. Lisa Damour, pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
For having me.